Hello, good afternoon. It is your host, Emmanuel Isaiah Smith, and today's date is Thursday, November 6th, 2025. The time is 3:16 p.m., and I am in Miami, Florida. The topic of today's lecture is America's image. And mind you, ladies and gentlemen, I do these discourses outdoors, so I may have to project or raise my voice from time to time to drown out the background noise. America has an image just like any other country has an image. And it's not just countries that have an image. Corporations have images, small business have images, colleges and universities have images, various other public and private auxiliaries have images, churches have images, people have images. An image is the immediate concept that people have of you based on your name or your likeness. Gang stalking, the state-sanctioned signaling mechanism, disruption, harassment, and attack protocol that was legalized on the coattails of national security legislation over the past 25 years, threatens to harm America's image. It appears to me that there are some elected officials and various other persons who work in public and private capacities that have different levels of interest into this mechanism of which I speak, called clandestine gang stalking. Different people have different opinions on the importance of many matters. But when something like gang stalking gets implemented into the U.S. legal code, it takes more than a casual interest in the topic for appropriate action to be taken. I've asserted in past lectures that the public and private entities that I thought would take the lead on gang stalking once the information had reached the public sphere have not particularly done anything. And these public and private entities consist of congressional officials, state and local legislatures, the Executive Office of the President of the United States, the Department of Defense, the Department of Justice, the mass media, and churches. These were the entities that I thought were most likely to take the lead on clandestine gang stalking. But it's starting to look like they've all been instructed not to say anything or weigh in or chime in at all. And that in itself is suspicious to me. So Since these various entities have decided to keep quiet on the matter, which could easily become the quintessential political topic of the 21st century, then I'll take the lead on it. Not just because I don't like something like this existing in this country, but because I'm affected personally by it. And because this thuggish program and its useful idiot weasels that participate in it are bloodthirsty and have every intention of using state-sanctioned methods to infringe upon my constitutional and inalienable rights, then I'm going to speak out about it. And what makes the matter more fascinating than you could ever imagine is the orchestrators of this program, its liaisons, and the stalkers themselves approach this street signaling and confrontation mechanism as if it's life or death. And that's pitiful. Okay? On their part. Because they execute their duties as stalkers with such fervor and commitment and reckless abandon that you'd think if they were to miss their assignment or miss the opportunity to act on this signal or that signal, that something really bad would happen to them as a result. That makes me think that gang stalkers have something at stake. And that they do what they do not only out of a sense of enjoyment, but out of a sense of necessity. Now, I'm not a gang stalker myself, so I don't know what ultimatums that gang stalkers are held to. But I find it a shame, especially with respect to adults, that you take time out of your day, that you take time out of your week, that you take time out of your life to participate in what is essentially animalistic and thuggish behavior. You have the choice to do that, and apparently you have the opportunity to continue to participate in clandestine gang stalking, you and your stalker buddies, or whoever it is you're chucking signals with when you go out, until the cows come home. Because apparently our federal establishment has not even acknowledged it on a national level or in an official capacity. So until that happens, it doesn't exist. At least not on paper. And that's the discipline of being a targeted individual, is knowing that this program is being denied. Its existence is being denied. Its merit denied. Its plausibility is being denied. By the very establishment that authorized it by stealth post 9/11. So that leaves it up to the targeted individuals to come forward with our story, and that's assuming I'm not the only targeted individual in the country, and present that story in such a way so that it hits the right ears. Because quite frankly, what you have is a state-sanctioned attack mechanism a state-sanctioned surveillance mechanism, and a state-sanctioned harassment, disruption, and confrontation mechanism that is not only illegal, but it's criminally negligent, and it's unconstitutional on its face. So what it's beginning to look like is that accountability is being slipped. No one wants to take accountability for this program being implemented, and because the liaisons of the program and the undercover operatives of the program operate in a behind-the-scenes capacity mostly, although trust me, I see my fair share of undercovers myself. All you have to really go off of with respect to any type of communication between target and stalker are the stalkers themselves. And the thing about it is, gang stalkers don't know they're gang stalkers. As a matter of fact, a lot of people that participate in it have never heard of gang stalking. They think they're simply plugged into some cool, sophisticated communication mechanism where they identify suspicious people and annoy the hell out of them arbitrarily. Okay, that's all they think it is. They don't realize that it has a name. They don't realize that people talk about it online. They don't realize that guys like me have created entire enterprises online based off of this program. If the wrong person gets a hold of your information, and when I say the wrong person, I mean anybody who has a problem with you in some capacity. Imagine if the people that hate you the most, regardless of what that reason is, got access to your personal information. Or maybe they got in touch with a family member or an acquaintance of yours who knows what you're up to just by virtue of their proximity to you. Alright, imagine if a family member or an acquaintance willingly gave out your information to a third party who constantly had it in for you, or constantly wanted to see bad things happen, or constantly wanted to cause bad things to happen. That will accelerate your gang stalking campaign. Okay? Gang stalkers thrive on information about the targeted individual. The more information they can get about you, the more of that domestic thuggery they can level against you using the gang stalking mechanism. Okay? You switch jobs. If your gang stalkers don't find out about that, they can't harass you. You switch schools. If the stalkers don't know where you went, they can't harass you. Okay? You joined a new church. If your stalkers don't have that information, there's nothing they can do to you. But if somebody who is close to you, or somebody who knows these things about you, is willingly feeding them this information, well, then they can infiltrate wherever it is you're at and level this domestic thuggery against you. You see, gang stalkers rely on information, and they get that information through espionage and hacking, but they also get that information from other persons. Okay? A stalker who wants to know what you're up to really, really bad could hack the voicemails and telephones and emails of people that are in the know about you. Like, for example, if you have a significant other, or if you have family members that you talk to regularly, Their communication methods can be hacked by stalkers so that they can find out what you're up to and where you are. In my case here in South Florida, I have a committed team of multi-county stalkers that follow me from the time I wake up in the morning to the time I go back to sleep at night with cars, pedestrians, and other various means of keeping tabs on where I'm at 24 hours a day. Okay? Now, I'm sure that there are undercover operatives and this kind of operative and that kind of operative and this kind of liaison, that kind of liaison that have some sort of a state-given authority to surveil me 24 hours a day. I don't mind that so long as you're professional. If you're not professional, I'm going to get on the air and call you a chimpanzee. Okay? Because that's what a lot of you conduct yourselves like. All right? But if you're professional and you're working in accordance with state guidelines and bearing in mind that I am a sovereign U.S. citizen with constitutional rights, I don't mind you watching or surveilling or gathering data. But these knuckleheads that you all have shadowing you, I'm talking to all my state-assisted surveillors and watchers and monitors. These tails that you guys have, these shadows that are shadowing you to my location, they conduct themselves like a bunch of zoo animals. All right? And their actions daily drive my narratives. Okay? What does it mean to have a good image? If a country is charitable, if a country is honest, if a country is strong, if a country is good, if a country makes sound economic decisions, if a country is responsible to its citizens, if a country makes sure that there's plenty of resources and programs and various other accommodations that it can provide with taxpayer money back to the taxpayer to increase their quality of living, that is a good country. Okay? If a country is good to its neighbors, if a country forms strong alliances, if a country is civil, even to the countries that it has adversarial relationships with, that country is good. And that country typically projects a good image. Now, we have seen this time and again through history, haven't we? Where a country forms a bad image. Okay? Let's look at some of the countries over the last we'll say the last 200 years that have formed a bad image, and let's compare some of what they did to some of what the United States is doing right this second. And then we'll get into some other examples of entities having good and bad images and why that's important. Okay? Now, the countries that I'm going to list in this lecture, these are countries that I believe today in the present are gorgeous countries. Okay? And are good stewards of human progression. But not every country has always been a good steward of human progression. Okay? So let's go back to the 1800s. All right, let's look at Belgium. At one time it was a kingdom. Belgium, under King Leopold, killed 11 million Africans in the rubber trade, exposing them to inhumane conditions and dangerous conditions, conditions that minimize the value of their lives, which, I mean, ultimately, Africans were exposed to those kinds of invading powers a lot in this, from I'd say maybe the 1200s through the early 1900s. So quite a long stretch there. And Africans were time and again used as doormats for various kingdom and empires, so that those kingdom and empires could get free labor and ingratiate themselves with Africa's natural resources. But obviously it isn't just Africa that has experienced this. Every country in the world has been invaded at some point. There isn't a single country anywhere in the world that has not been invaded by a neighboring country. When a country invades another country with the intention of exploiting that country, the people who are the subjects of that invasion are not treated well. Okay, they're oftentimes forced into slavery. They're oftentimes beaten. The women and children are oftentimes abused. The men are oftentimes executed without a good reason. The natural resources are oftentimes exploited. Okay, the Romans conquered pretty much every Western European country in medieval times. And when the Romans invaded, they invaded you and they annexed you. All right? The Babylonians invaded Israel and enslaved those people and abused those people. This was in about 530 BC. And then later, probably 10 years later actually, the Persians invaded the Babylonians and did the same thing to them that the Babylonians did to Israel. Then generations later, the Greeks invaded the Persians. And they did to the Persians what the Persians did to the Babylonians. Generations later, the Romans conquered Greece and did to Greece what they did to the Persians. There was a lot of exploitation going on. There was a lot of inhumane treatment going on. There were a lot of atrocities that happened. Atrocities happen when military conflicts happen. It's the nature of war. And there isn't a single country in this world that has not had its people enslaved by another country. It's happened across the board, and that includes medieval times and recent times. When empires were being formed, people became slaves and various acts that were atrocious were committed. You see, from one side of the globe to the other, conflicts happened, empires happened, atrocities happened. And there isn't a single people that exist in the world today that have not had atrocious things done to them by another people. Okay, but see, when you're talking about kingdoms and empires, they're less concerned with their image. Okay, when the Romans conquered Western Europe, okay, they were not concerned with what people thought of their methods. Their goal was simply to absorb the enemy. You see, and that's the way it's always been. Kingdoms and empires have never terribly thought much about their image, because diplomacy was not considered a wise political strategy in medieval times. It was survival of the strongest. Okay, might is right. Whoever the toughest country was, whoever the most enterprising country was, whoever the most fortuitous country, whoever the most manipulative country was, they were able to get the better of countries who had less of these qualities and characteristics, and that was just the law of the jungle. But these days, we live in a world of treatises, constitutions, international agreements, proliferation, social order, a global economy. We have more of a reason these days to need diplomacy and to keep a good image, not only at home, but abroad. Okay, if we look at another situation where a country developed a bad image in these times, okay, you have Nazi Germany. Okay, Nazi Germany had a Third Reich government led by Adolf Hitler that saw it fit to attempt to annihilate its Jewish population and the population of other minorities that the executive office of Nazi Germany thought were disruptive to society. So they sought to annihilate them using various means. And that earned Nazi Germany a bad image. Now, of course, Germany was part of the Axis powers, which included Imperial Japan and Fascist Italy, among others. But Hitler's treatment of its citizens, particularly the ones that it did not particularly care for, gave it a bad image. And I think that the worldwide shock of what Adolf Hitler and his government were doing to their Jewish and other populations, other demographic minority populations, fueled their enemies. Their enemies were able to get a morale boost by knowing that this sprawling Western European power called Nazi Germany was absorbing disdain on the world stage for the things they were doing inside their country to their own citizens. And I believe that Joseph Stalin's government was able to capitalize on the lack of morale that Nazi Germany was experiencing at the time Nazi Germany attempted to cross the Eastern Front and invade Russia. Okay, history shows us that the Soviet Union army decimated the Nazis on the Eastern Front, and that was essentially the end of Hitler, because the United States had already begun invading Nazi Germany, and at one time they bombed Dresden, the United States, killing 200,000 people in Dresden, Germany. So wartime atrocities are unfortunate. They happen. All right. Not much was published in the mainstream news media about the bombing of Dresden. Okay, but Hitler's atrocities were front page because his were systematic and atrocious in nature. Let's look at another regime, okay? Fascist Italy gained a bad reputation during the rule of Benito Mussolini, because apparently he had an incarceration mechanism where he had his military and his secret police force going out into Rome and surrounding cities and kidnapping people that were either political dissidents or simply people that they wanted to keep incarcerated for their own shadowy reasons. Some believe that they had torture cells and rape rooms and things like that to entertain the elite of fascist Italy. This information got around the governments, and ultimately Italy became a bit of a pariah alongside Hitler's Nazi Germany. And needless to say, fascist Italy didn't fare too well in World War II. If you look at the 1970s, Idi Amin, who was the subject of a phenomenal movie called The Last King of Scotland, starring Forrest Whitaker and James McAvoy and Gillian Anderson, which explored Idi Amin's rule as the president of Uganda. Now, as it turns out, Idi Amin, at some point in his rule, did something similar to what Joseph Stalin did during his rule. Idi Amin started getting paranoid of some of his officials that they were working with the British government and other European governments to bring him down. And he began having various people in his cabinet and in his government executed. Something very similar to what Joseph Stalin did during the Great Purge, when he started becoming paranoid of his surrounding officials. Idi Amin at one time kicked all of the East Indian people out of Uganda because his thinking was that they were absorbing the wealth of the country and not giving anything back. Okay, he called them leeches and parasites, and he had them rounded up at some point and kicked out of the country. He also had the Jewish population removed, if I remember correctly. And at some point he had to flee Uganda because of an uprising, if I'm not mistaken. And he ended up moving to Saudi Arabia, where he stayed until his passing in 2003. Idi Amin gained a bad image and reputation because of how he treated his own citizens. And look what happened. He was forcefully removed from power and he had to flee the country. Leaving the country that you live in is not a bad thing. Some people just can't function in their home country. Okay? Some people may ask, Smith, if you had the means, would you leave the United States permanently? Hell yes. I wouldn't even think about it. I'm not going to live out my days as a targeted individual, especially in a country that could do something about it but chooses not to. Okay? I'm not playing those games here. So ultimately, you have many examples, including the United States, of countries who have procured a bad image in other parts of the world. There are other parts of the world that condemn the United States for its extensive use of the transatlantic slave trade. A lot of Africans that came over here to work for free in cotton and tobacco fields were beaten with whips. A lot of the women were raped. That's why we have a lot of light-skinned black people in the United States. Very high, fair-skinned black people in the United States. Chances are they had a grandmother or great-grandmother or great-great-great-grandmother somewhere down the line that had some sort of a mixed tryst with someone that forced them to. And as a result of that tryst, mulatto children were born, and their descendants are very fair-skinned as well. Okay, a lot of Africans were executed for acts of insubordination and so forth, and generation after generation of those Africans were slaves their entire life. Okay, there were countries in Europe that condemned that. There were countries in Asia that condemned that. America's image improved drastically around the world when it abolished slavery. Some might argue that Russia's image took a hit when it invaded Ukraine. Me personally, I'm of the mindset that Ukraine is very derivative of Russia. And it's derivative of Russia to the point where if Russia sought to annex or take control of Ukraine, I believe it has the right to do that. Now, the Russian state's image has taken a hit because of these horror stories that are coming out of Ukraine of civilians being massacred, etc. I mean, ultimately, I can't name too many countries that have joined the effort on the side of Ukraine. I mean, you got all these countries around the world saying, justice for Ukraine, justice for Ukraine. This is a horrible thing, but they're not sending any soldiers to help. I think President Biden sold the Ukraine government a bunch of weapons to help itself defend against Russia, but it didn't send any troops. It was like, here goes a bunch of machine guns, some army tanks, and some jets. But we're not sending our troops into that hellhole. So, ultimately what you have is a situation where a country's image took a hit because of a political decision it made with respect to its army. The same thing with Israel. Okay, on October 7th of last year, masked gunmen that I believe identified themselves as being Hamas militants killed 1,500 Israelis in the streets of Tel Aviv, if I'm not mistaken. And this was considered by Israel and Israel's allies to be an act of terror. And Israel responded by essentially decimating Gaza. And in the process, a lot of civilians were killed. And the international community at some point started asking Israel, is this necessary? Is that necessary? Explain yourself. Now, ultimately, Israel only offered the explanation that they wanted to push Palestinian influences as far into the fringe as possible so as to avoid another October 7th style attack. Israel did what it thought was right, but its image took a hit on the world stage, culminating with South Africa, the South African government, petitioning the United Nations to file a charge of genocide against Israel. And Israel has answered those claims, essentially echoing what I just said, that it saw its actions as necessary. Our elected officials, particularly on the Republican side, are of the mindset, if Hamas had never gunned down those people in the street, there would have been no retaliation, and that this is an ancient battle, an ancient war between two rival demographics of this world. And quite frankly, such a matter could turn into a world war if the Middle Eastern states are not careful. Okay, notice how the Middle Eastern supporters of the Palestinians kind of stayed back in the distance and didn't intervene to the degree that was expected by some. That's because if Iran, and various other Middle Eastern actors who are not totally in favor of Israel existing in the capacity that it does, were to get involved, that skirmish would immediately turn into a world war. Immediately. So Iran had to be careful. It had to keep a cautious distance from the conflict. And I think a lot of countries that could have got involved didn't, because they were of the mindset that the situation could spiral out of control in a heartbeat. Okay, Israel's image took a hit, but ultimately, Israel is an important strategic ally of the United States in that region. And you're not going to hear a lot of bad press about Israel here in the United States or in any of its ally countries. So a number of countries, Iran, particularly in the mid-2000s, when it was enriching uranium and and developing blueprints for nuclear arms, America was at the forefront of that discussion as to why they shouldn't own nuclear weapons. It was, well, they're going to take those nuclear weapons and they're going to nuke Israel. They're going to exterminate the Jews. They're going to wipe Israel off the map because that's what they want. Iran shouldn't have a nuclear weapon because of what they'll do to destabilize humanity with it. And eventually Iran's image took a hit on the world stage because a lot of countries, particularly Western governments, started seeing Iran as a nuclear bully and as a country that was looking to grab power with nuclear weapons. And Iran's image took a hit on the world stage during those times, but as more and more people started researching nuclear proliferation, etc., and the more it came to light how many countries in the world carry nuclear weapons in their arsenal, what Iran started doing with their nuclear program when they started it back over, it got less attention this time around because, well, it looks like every country on planet Earth has nuclear weapons. How come Iran can't? And it just became an issue of basically countries just needing to mind their own business beyond what's necessary. Okay, the United States, our armed forces reputation took a hit recently, probably about 4 years ago, when the Taliban kicked the United States out of Afghanistan. That was something that was extremely embarrassing. And Donald Trump, who I think at the time was a presidential contender, said that was an embarrassing thing to happen to the United States. And he said, if I were president, that would never happen. So I believe the United States, their image took a hit. It's like, wait a minute, you spend $2 trillion a year on your military, and you all got kicked out of Afghanistan by the Taliban? How did that happen? The Iraq War. The United States image took a hit during the Iraq War. Why? Because it invaded a country that didn't have nothing to do with 9/11. And the intel that they got was so bad that it caused a Middle Eastern catastrophe. And it didn't even solve the question as to who did 9/11. Okay, you guys got Saddam Hussein hanged from a tree, and you got a bunch of oil from the Iraqis. But what else was that war for? That war cost $230 billion. You spent $230 billion to get Saddam Hussein hanged? All right, Saddam Hussein was a noted adversary of the United States up to that point, but who in the Middle East wasn't during those times, particularly the 70s, 80s, and 90s? You can't lynch all the dictators of all the Middle Eastern states in the world. But Saddam Hussein was executed by persons in his own country that didn't like him. But it was our troops that found him hiding in that ditch or that bunker or wherever he was that led to that hanging. And yeah, I don't doubt Saddam Hussein carried out murders and assassinations against persons that did and didn't deserve it. But $230 billion just to see his Saddam Hussein hanging from a tree with a noose around his neck. I think our money is better spent renovating public schools, investing in education, investing in the abolition and the eradication of violent crimes in the United States, that kind of thing. Okay, if Saddam Hussein is a terrorist, he's going to get what's coming to him. But let's not use Saddam as a scapegoat to commit ourselves to a war where all we do is blow up civilians and siphon oil. The American federal establishment's image took a hit during those times. And the world was asking America, when the hell are you going to pull out of there? Haven't you accomplished your mission? Osama bin Laden's not even there. He's in Afghanistan. Why are you in Iraq? You are 5,000 miles away from the mark. All right. So many nations around the world have had their images hit because of this political matter, because of that political matter. Businesses too. Look what happened to Enron. They were stealing from their investors and got shut down. Okay? There are so many examples of this. Companies taking a hit. All right? Look at what happened with Bernie Madoff and his investment company. He ran a $52 million Ponzi scheme, or $52 billion Ponzi scheme. He robbed investors blind. All right, so a company's image can take a hit just like any other. I mean, look at what happened to Facebook, Google, Twitter, and so many other social media companies in the late 2010s, when it was determined that by federal investigators that they were illegally sharing their users' information with third parties, selling their information to third parties, et cetera, et cetera. I think TikTok has come under similar scrutiny. I'll be honest with you, ladies and gentlemen, sharing my data with a third party, even if you're selling it, to me is less of an infraction than putting your citizens in a state-sanctioned domestic thuggery module like gang stalking. If somebody asked me, Smith, what would you rather have? Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, etc., selling your information to unauthorized third parties? Or would you rather have the United States federal establishment give your name and vital statistics to a thuggish, paramilitary, state-sanctioned signaling, harassment, attack, and germ-spreading cause called gang stalking, which would follow you around for the rest of your days? I'd say, you know what? Go ahead and sign me up for the illegal data collector. I'll take that instead of gang stalking any day. And I find it hypocritical that so many social media companies, including TikTok, which is an auxiliary of the Chinese government, has come under all this scrutiny for their collection of data and what they do with that data. I would rather have the government of China collect my data and do as they pleased with it than have the government of the United States of America put me in a clandestine gang stalking campaign in which I would essentially been rendered as dysfunctional in society. From the time I first read the United States Constitution at the age of 10 to the time that I realized I was a targeted individual at the age of 30, if anyone had asked me, what do you think of this country? I'd have said, well, it's definitely one of the best countries in the world, and I'm glad to be an American. I would have told you that from the age of 10 to the age of 30. But since I realized that I was in a state-funded harassment, disruption, and containment method called gang stalking, in which strongs of useful idiots are mobilized using signs and communicative gestures to my exact location and the location of my significant other for no reason but to cause us problems in an unlimited capacity, that has made my concept of America and my image of America and my opinion of America as a sovereign territorial entity, as a country, as a nation, and as a government drop drastically. Can America re-win my respect? Yeah, under two conditions. If it makes gang stalking illegal and compensates me for my troubles with gang stalking, then I will forgive the United States. If not, I will likely forever consider the United States as a dysfunctional entity for allowing this domestic thuggery protocol to be implemented against U.S. citizens. Ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, what it comes down to is the truth and the whole truth, which is what I bring to you on a daily basis here on my program, the Gang Stalking in Action live video series, customary of EIS Media Group and Bible Discourses LLC, both companies that I started and operate in a sole entrepreneurship capacity. Okay, I invoke my First Amendment rights to the United States Constitution to say everything I'm saying here and now. I'm of the mindset that every life that's born into this world is valuable in its own way from the time that person is born to the time that person leaves the earth. All right, a 25-year-old man who is sane, energetic, and hardworking has, in my mind, the same value on this earth as a 99-year-old woman who is nearly incapacitated. A living life is a living life, and they all have equal value in society. And each life ought to be valued from the time they enter to the time they leave this void that we call time and space. Inalienable rights are those rights that no man, woman, child, company, or government can ever legally or lawfully infringe upon. And a targeted individual's inalienable rights are routinely infringed upon by mobs of thuggish, hostile, surly, aloof, goofy, and stupid gang stalkers. Thank you for tuning in.